The air in Egypt hangs heavy with oppression. For generations, the cries of the enslaved Israelites have risen to the heavens. Now, the Creator of the universe answers. God calls Moses, an ordinary shepherd with a stuttering tongue, to confront Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler on earth. Pharaoh views himself as a living God, but he is about to meet the true God. Stay until the end, because this is one of the most terrifying and powerful moments in biblical history. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with your loved ones for more powerful Bible stories and mysteries like this. Armed only with a wooden staff and the terrifying name of the Almighty, Moses steps into the royal court. He delivers a definitive, earth-shaking ultimatum. Let my people go. Pharaoh laughs, hardening his heart, and that prideful laugh sets off the greatest cosmic showdown in human history. Moses stood before Pharaoh once again with a warning from the Almighty, but Pharaoh refused to listen. Then Moses raised his staff over the sacred Nile River, the very lifeblood of Egypt. In an instant, the waters turned into thick blood. The mighty Nile became a river of death. Fish floated lifeless to the surface. The water began to rot, and a horrifying stench spread across the entire land of Egypt. Panic filled the streets. The people ran desperately from river to river, digging into the ground in search of clean water to drink. But everywhere they turned, there was blood. The empire that trusted in the Nile for life now stood face to face with the judgment of God. Once again, God sent Moses before Pharaoh with a warning, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh refused to listen. Then Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and suddenly the Nile exploded with frogs. Millions upon millions of frogs flooded the land. They poured out of the river and invaded every corner of Egypt. They crawled through the streets, covered the floors, and filled the homes of the people. There was no escape. Frogs leaped onto beds while families tried to sleep. They crawled into ovens and cooking bowls. They covered tables, bedrooms, and even Pharaoh's palace itself. The entire nation was overwhelmed. Every step the Egyptians took was met with the sound of squashing frogs beneath their feet. The land became unbearable. The smell, the noise, the endless swarming creatures turned daily life into complete chaos. What Egypt once worshipped as sacred now became a curse upon the nation. And still, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Pharaoh still refused to listen. His heart remained hard, even after the Nile turned to blood and millions of frogs invaded Egypt. Then God commanded Moses, "Stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth." Moses obeyed. The moment his staff touched the ground, something terrifying happened. Every speck of dust across Egypt suddenly came alive. The dirt itself transformed into swarming gnats and biting lice. They covered the land like a living cloud. The insects crawled across people's skin, into their hair, their eyes, their clothes. There was no escape. Animals panicked as the creatures swarmed over them. People screamed and scratched their skin in agony. The entire nation of Egypt was overwhelmed by the plague. Pharaoh's magicians rushed forward, desperately trying to copy the miracle with their secret arts. But this time, they failed. For the first time, fear entered their hearts. Shaken and trembling, they turned to Pharaoh and whispered, "This is the finger of God." Even Egypt's sorcerers realized they were witnessing a power far greater than their own. But Pharaoh still hardened his heart and refused to let God's people go. Moses returned to Pharaoh carrying another warning from the Lord. "Let my people go." But Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn. Then disaster struck Egypt again. Without warning, massive swarms of flies descended upon the land. The skies darkened as millions of flies filled the air like a terrifying black cloud. They invaded every corner of Egypt. Homes became infested. Food was ruined. The streets crawled with insects. The constant buzzing echoed throughout the cities day and night. People screamed and covered their faces as the flies swarmed over their bodies, their animals, and everything they owned. Egypt was being consumed by chaos. But in the middle of the destruction, God performed a miracle. In the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there were no flies. Not a single swarm touched them. While Egypt suffered under fear and judgment, God's people remained completely protected. Pharaoh could no longer ignore what was happening. The God of Israel was making a clear distinction between his people and Egypt, a line between judgment and mercy, a line between destruction and protection. The plague proved that the Almighty had complete power over the land, the skies, and every living thing. Still, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let the people go. Moses stood before Pharaoh with another warning from the Almighty. "Let my people go, so they may worship me." But Pharaoh refused to listen. Then the hand of God moved against Egypt once again. A deadly pestilence spread across the land. Without warning, Egypt's prized animals began to collapse in the fields. Horses fell to the ground. Camels weakened and died. Cattle, sheep, and donkeys dropped where they stood. Panic swept through Egypt as farmers and servants watched their livestock perish before their eyes. The animals that powered Egypt's economy, its transportation, its farming, and its wealth were suddenly destroyed. The cries of fear echoed throughout the land as dead animals covered the fields of Egypt. The empire that trusted in its riches and power was being brought to its knees. But in the middle of the judgment, God performed another miracle. Not a single animal belonging to the Israelites died. Not one. While Egypt suffered devastating loss, the livestock of God's people remained completely untouched. Pharaoh investigated the matter himself and discovered it was true. The God of Israel had once again drawn a clear line between Egypt and his people, a line between destruction and protection, a line between judgment and mercy. Still, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let the Israelites go. The warnings continued, but Pharaoh still refused to humble himself before the God of Israel. Then the Lord gave Moses another command. Moses took handfuls of soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. As he threw the ash into the air, the wind carried it across the land of Egypt, and suddenly a terrifying plague broke out. Painful boils erupted on the skin of every Egyptian. The sores spread rapidly across their bodies, burning, swelling, and causing unbearable agony. Men cried out in pain. Women collapsed in fear. Even the animals were covered with painful wounds. The suffering was everywhere. The same hands that once built monuments and palaces now scratched at burning skin in desperation. Then something shocking happened. Pharaoh's royal magicians, the very men who once mocked Moses and tried to imitate God's miracles, could no longer stand before him. The boils had covered them too. Weak and trembling with pain, they collapsed before the power of the Almighty. The kingdom of Egypt was beginning to realize a terrifying truth. No magic, no false god, and no earthly power could stand against the God of Israel. Yet even after witnessing such suffering and judgment, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let the people go. Then the Lord sent Moses before Pharaoh with another terrifying warning, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh still refused to humble himself before the Almighty. So Moses lifted his staff toward the heavens, and suddenly the sky over Egypt began to change. Dark clouds rolled across the land. Thunder shook the earth. The heavens roared with fury. Then came the storm. Massive hailstones crashed down from the sky with unstoppable force. But this was no ordinary storm. Fire flashed through the hail like rivers of lightning burning across the ground. The people of Egypt had never seen anything like it before. Trees shattered, fields were destroyed, crops were flattened within moments. The storm tore through the land with terrifying power. Anyone left outside was struck down instantly, both man and animal. Panic spread throughout Egypt as the skies unleashed judgment upon the nation. The mighty empire that once stood proud now trembled beneath the power of God. But even in the middle of destruction, the Lord showed mercy. In the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, no hail fell. God protected his people while Egypt suffered under the storm. For the first time, Pharaoh admitted, "I have sinned." But the moment the storm stopped, his heart hardened again, and he still refused to let God's people go. Pharaoh continued to resist the command of God. Even after the terrifying storms and destruction, his heart remained hardened. Then the Lord warned Egypt of another judgment unlike anything they had ever seen before. A fierce east wind began to blow across the land, hour after hour, throughout the entire day and night. The wind grew stronger, then suddenly they appeared. A massive wall of locusts covered the skies of Egypt. There were so many that the sun itself seemed to disappear behind them. The sound of their wings filled the air like an approaching army. The locusts descended upon Egypt in endless numbers. They covered the ground, the rooftops, the trees, and every remaining field. Anything left standing after the hailstorm was instantly consumed. Every leaf vanished. Every blade of grass disappeared. Every fruit tree was stripped bare within moments. The land that once overflowed with abundance became a lifeless wilderness. Nothing green remained in all of Egypt. The people watched in horror as their final source of food disappeared before their eyes. Fear swept across the nation. Pharaoh's officials begged him, "How long will this man be a snare to us?" But the destruction had already begun. The mighty empire of Egypt was collapsing under the power of God. Then Pharaoh rushed to Moses in desperation, confessing his sin and begging for the plague to stop. Moses prayed to the Lord, and God sent a powerful west wind that carried the locusts away into the Red Sea. But once relief came, Pharaoh hardened his heart again and refused to let the people go. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven." Moses obeyed, and suddenly a terrifying darkness fell across Egypt. This was no ordinary night. The darkness was supernatural. It covered the land so heavily that it could be physically felt. The skies turned black. The sun disappeared. Every light was swallowed by the overwhelming darkness. Fear gripped the nation. For 3 agonizing days, Egypt sat trapped in complete darkness. No one could see. No one could move. People remained frozen where they were, terrified by the crushing blackness surrounding them. The mighty empire of Egypt, once filled with wealth, pride, and power, was brought to complete silence. The gods of Egypt could not save them. Their torches could not overcome the darkness. Their king could not stop the judgment of God. But in the middle of the darkness, a miracle appeared. In the homes of the Israelites, there was light. While Egypt suffered in fear and confusion, God's people lived under divine protection. The Lord once again revealed the difference between his people and those who opposed him. A line between darkness and light. A line between fear and peace. A line between judgment and protection. Pharaoh finally called for Moses and demanded that Israel leave. But when Moses warned him again, Pharaoh's anger burned fiercely. Still, his heart remained hardened before the Almighty. Then came the final warning, the most devastating judgment Egypt would ever face. Before midnight arrived, God gave Moses detailed instructions for the Israelites. Every family was commanded to sacrifice a spotless lamb. Then they were to take the blood of the lamb and place it upon the wooden doorposts of their homes. It was a sign, a mark of obedience, a mark of faith, a mark of divine protection. That night, fear filled the land of Egypt. The streets became silent, the air felt heavy, and darkness covered the nation as everyone waited for what would happen next. Then, at midnight, the judgment of God passed through Egypt. But wherever the blood of the Lamb was seen upon the doorposts, judgment passed over that house. Inside the homes of the Israelites, families remained safe beneath the covering of the blood. But across Egypt, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh sitting on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner locked inside the dungeon, the wrath of judgment fell upon the land. Even the firstborn of the animals were struck. The cries of grief and terror echoed throughout Egypt like never before. No house was untouched. The mighty empire that once enslaved God's people was now broken beneath the power of the Almighty. Pharaoh himself was shattered by grief. The ruler who once mocked God now stood defeated before him. In the middle of the night, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and finally surrendered. "Leave my people," he commanded. That very night, the chains of slavery were broken, and the people of Israel walked out of Egypt into freedom under the mighty hand of God. The blood upon the doorposts became a powerful sign of salvation, protection, and deliverance. And it revealed a truth that would echo throughout history forever. When God protects his people, no power on earth can stand against him. The same God who broke the chains of Egypt is still breaking chains today. No Pharaoh in your life, no mountain of debt, no fear, and no season of darkness is too powerful for the Almighty. The God who made a way through the Red Sea is still making a way for his people today. So whatever battle you are facing right now, remember this. The battle belongs to the Lord. If you believe God is fighting for you, do 3 things right now. First, drop a comment below typing, "God is my deliverer." Second, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful Bible story and journey into the unfiltered power of Scripture. And finally, share this video with someone who needs encouragement tonight. Someone who feels trapped, someone who feels tired, someone who needs to remember that God still delivers his people. Sleep tonight in the peace of the Almighty, and we will see you in the next video.